Hey folks, thanks for tuning in today. This is going to be a video on my RC remote control vehicles that I currently own, and the main one that I own is that I'm running around and kind of modding and making recent videos on, is the Traxxas Fortec 2.0 with the VLX motor and the VLX or the 2S or 3S battery. I've kept all the stock, pretty much servo and the electronics in this vehicle. It's just a fun, it's a ready to run, but it's definitely not what some people you know ignorantly would classify as a child's toy, because this thing can do 60-70 miles per hour, and it is a pretty quality product, other than just some shortcomings. But I've made now maybe about 10 videos on this, and I've talked about some of the things I had to do, I didn't have to do, which I think is cool, because you can buy it out of the box and just run it and have fun. You're not forced to immediately go in and buy these things to make it run right. It's just fun over time to be able to go and buy some things and put it into the vehicle and just improve it. And that's with, pretty much all the ready to runs that you can do. But there are some, some people would consider that you have to take all the electronics out, and you have to buy new electronics for it and put new electronics to make it even worth anything. And, that's debatable. I mean, that's just however you think and who you are. But that's not how I want to buy into the hobby. I want to be able to buy the vehicle, run it, and then upgrade when I want to, and if I need to. But today's video is, so these are the plastic little shocks that come on the Fortec 2.0. Obviously there's 4 of them, and they have little springs. I've dismantled them to compare them to the newer aluminum versions that I bought, and that's the whole point of this video. So here are the shocks. They're broken down. Here's a little top collar that fits on there, just right here. And then these are the little spacers that you can add to adjust the spring, preload. These are one aspect that I didn't like, and I thought upgrading would be a benefit to, is having a collar that spins and the shocks are threaded. So I'm going to show you that now with the upgraded shocks that I bought. But yeah, these are all the parts, and the bottom, spring retainer is plastic too. So it's basically a plastic shock with a metal shock shaft, and this shock shaft is either 2.2 millimeters or 2.5 millimeters. And yeah, so here we go. Actually, the oil that's in it makes it pretty stiff. We're going to look at the differences between the upgraded ones, if you can call it an upgrade. And here we go. So here we have, this is the GPM Aluminum 6061 alloy threaded shock, and the front is 58 millimeters and the rear is 60 millimeters, the length of the shock. So the rear is a little bit longer than the front. They are aluminum, and like I said, they're threaded. They have a little threaded collar here so that you can adjust that. This is a better way of doing it, obviously. A little bit more expensive because you have to thread it, and you have to have a little aluminum collar. But these are the GPM shocks, and they were specified to fit the Traxxas Fortec 2.0. That's what they were labeled as. So we're going to dive into these and look at the differences between these cool looking, and they come in different colors. I don't know, I just opted for this, what color is that? Kind of a bronze color. I just thought it was cool. They had some red and some blue, but this is the one I picked with the black. And they say they have a little laser etched GPM there. These are a lot of different places, and obviously these are made in China. And they have a metal aluminum bottom retainer right here. And these are plastic, but with a metal eyelet. And the shock springs, compared to the factory shock springs that come on the basic Fortec 2.0, there's a lot more spring travel. Let me pull this up for you right here. So the spring is longer on the GPM shocks, and there's a lot more travel in that spring, and they appear to be a little bit more stiff. So you just have to kind of decide. I think I'm not really immediately set on which one is better and it's going to perform better. But there we have that. Also too, the GPM little shocks come with an additional stiffer silver colored spring, but man, these are really stiff compared to the black ones that are not as stiff. See, I can compress the black ones, but not fully the silver ones. So the black ones I think are the ones to go with. But now that I've taken the little shock apart, I think this is be very interesting because I didn't find very many videos on these little shocks. They initially look really, really cool. But when I received them, because I just didn't know, you take the top portion off, and I've torqued this one off and they're on there pretty tight when they come. Hopefully my camera is focusing on this. When you take this off, your standard little shocks that I've dealt with in the past, and most people probably deal with when they buy little shocks for RC vehicles, you know, a little higher, more high performance shocks. Let me pull this off. That does not allow you to put oil in it and service the shock. Look at that. This is just a cap, and the little center portion can come out of the cap that has the little eyelet. So again, this goes on, screws on. There's nothing wrong with it, just different. Not bashing these little things. I just didn't know that. But most of the time you service the little shock by taking the top off, and then you have access to the inside. So obviously you have to take the bottom part of this shock off, and that unscrews, and I haven't done that. I'm not necessarily wanting to do that right away, but I do think the oil that's in there is probably 10 weight versus the oil that's in the factory Traxxas little shock is probably closer to 20 or 30 weight. And also too, I'm just going to debate that a little bit as we go forward in the video, that I don't know if 30 weight is needed for this little Traxxas 2.0 4Tech vehicle. That kind of is stiffer than what the movement than what I think a little vehicle, 1/10 scale little car needs. Being able to, that's over dampened, maybe. I'll figure this out in future videos, but you can see this is the GPM. There is oil in there. It's just able to move that faster, so it's not as thick. But my thinking is that on a little small car like this, having it less dampened is going to be a positive thing. I'm just going to have to figure this out, driving it once I install these, because you want the shocks to be able to absorb the little bumps and actually function, where this, because it is slowed down because of the thicker oil, it may likely cause the 4Tech 2.0 little car to bounce around and deflect off the inconsistencies in the ground, the bumps and the rocks, and cause the front end to reflect off them and be bouncy. And I've seen this personally when, the first couple of months or, up to this point, this vehicle, when it hits, the joints in the road or little bumps or inconsistencies, like I said, on the surface, it gets a little bouncy. And it's not because of the shocks are not absorbing the bumps, it's that they're too stiff. And, just playing around with it and moving this suspension up with the axis of the shock, it is very hard for me to move this even with my hand. And again, you would probably, in my opinion, want that to be a little softer. And these are the softer springs, the red Traxxas springs. So this is all just what I'm thinking in my mind, and I haven't determined just yet by running it. But here's the shock with the spring, and it does stiffen up quite a bit. And maybe this will be a bonus. Maybe, you know, GPM tested this out and found out that this is a performance advantage over the little factory Traxxas shock. We'll see. Not to make this video too complicated or overly done, but let me just put this shock back together so you can see it. But just to mention, this GPM shock has a 3.0 millimeter shock shaft, so the main advantage of that is maybe it won't bend as easily if you hit something and you're not going to bend that shock shaft, because you can bend the shock shafts on the shocks, and that makes them pretty much worthless when you do that. But so this is probably a little bit more durable of a shock. So anything that you take from this is probably the durability, a little bit upgrade going with the GPM shock. $37 and not $80 shocks. All right, so now I got the little Traxxas shock back together. I don't know why I'm having difficulty moving my mouth and pronouncing things. So the little plastic spacers for the preload, again, I don't really like that. Everything is plastic on the Traxxas shock, where everything is pretty much aluminum on the GPM, minus the little ends. But they both have the little metal eyelets, and they swivel just a little bit. And that's helpful for aligning the shocks on the shock towers and making them not bind up. All right, hopefully this is helpful, so, you know, enjoyable for a few people. I'm just saying maybe 5 or 10 people. Don't get a ton of views on some of my content, but again, it's just fun making videos. But I found that the little swivel eyelets are a little stiff when they come out of the little, you know, package. These need to wobble a little bit. And so one thing that I did with my little factory, that, you know, the OEM shocks that came on the Fortec, is that I put a little lubricating fluid in there with the eyelets, so they move really smoothly. So I have some Tri-Flow. You can use all kinds of different things, but this usually dries and then it leaves a Teflon thin film, and so that Teflon thin film doesn't attract dust and dirt, and dust and dirt will contaminate anything that you put it on. So that dries, and I put it on this one shock, and these move a lot more freely. I just, little tip that comes out, and you just put it on there and put it where you need it to go, and then let it sit and it dries. And then it doesn't have such an oily surface, and that will lubricate those up and make those move around and spin. They rotate around and then they wobble. I'm not going to be able to show it because I have fat fingers. But I think these will be a cool upgrade, not just for looks, because I don't consider just looks enough to buy a product. And it needs to have looks, and it needs to have a performance advantage. It needs to function better. And, you know, you can look at this as going to be more reliable because it's not going to bend as easily or break as easily as the factory little Traxxas plastic shock. These are still really good. Don't get me wrong. They function well. They're smooth. And they get the job done at, you know, a little bit more, making it more affordable, because these are going to cost a little bit more money because they're aluminum and they take a little more, you know, input to make them, but we're going to put these on. One of the ways that I'm going to kind of just visually judge is that I'm going to use my hands. I have the additional sway bars put on this little Fortec, and I have a video on that. That's just one of the things that I purchased extra, and these are about $26, $27 for the front and rear sway bars, and they come in a package, and there's 3 different thicknesses. So I think it was worth doing the sway bars. How much do they add? You know, at this level of this scale, I think it was worth it. But, you know, you're just going to have to decide, you know, whether you want to go get those. But I think it is an advantage. But you can see as I move one side of the suspension, the other is affected by that. So you'll just have to study up on sway bars and how those work and how they add a performance advantage. I'm just not going to take the time to do that here, but I can just feel by moving the shocks with my hand on the vehicle how smooth and how they function. So that's going to be one way that I'm going to determine if putting these on is an advantage too, and how it just feels by moving it with my hand. All right, I apologize. Holding things up too close to the camera. Nothing's in sharp focus, but hopefully that does help because you want to see up a little bit closer. But yep, it's out of focus, of course. My camera does not focus as close as I want. DJI Action Pro, the latest and greatest from them. It is a great camera otherwise. But here, I've got the GPM shock installed, just one, and compared to the Traxxas shock, the OEM that comes on there. These tend to look like a little longer travel, just a little bit. Still line up with the eyelets up in, the bottom and the top. Let me move this around but you can get a look at it. Definitely looks better. If you're just buying something for the looks advantage, this is 100% better looking. I like the bronze color, actually pretty cool, and with the black spring. But you can see here, these are closer. This is a tighter wound spring where this has more gap in it. I tend to like this one better, but you're just going to have to make that personal decision on what you're thinking and how that works. But this is a little bit more bound up, and less, it definitely gets the tension or the firmness ramps up really, really fast versus the GPM shock right here. And I'm having a hard time holding. But you're just going to take my word for it. It just feels a little bit better. All right, got all 4 shocks installed. It looks a lot better, obviously. It looks a lot more trick if you're into that type of stuff. But like, it has to perform better too, not just for looks in this regards. But there's the rears. And there is the fronts. Probably a little bit more difficult to see the fronts, but just from sitting here, in the first second, they feel better. They just feel smoother. They feel like they move better, and they don't have so much resistance of moving as far as, because the spring seems to be able to be compressed easier, and there's still, in my opinion, plenty of dampening. When you release, it's not just riding on a spring, but you want your wheels to be able to follow the terrain, and when it hits a rock or something, you want it to move up and you want it to move back down fairly quickly. It's a balancing game. You don't want it to be on a pogo stick, but I think that these are good enough with the weight of oil that's in there versus the spring rate that this could be an advantage. We'll just have to see. I'll have to drive it. Even then, I'm not a pro driver, and it would be maybe difficult for me to, tell, right away. But they definitely feel better. And versus, if someone has a question about weight, obviously the little aluminum shock is just minorly, just very, very minorly heavier than the little factory plastic shock. It's not a big difference. It's very hard to notice. There's not a big weight penalty going with the aluminum shocks, in my opinion. Everything feels pretty good. Maybe if these are 10 weight, maybe go up to 15, 20 weight. They're just a little bit of springiness, a little bit of pogoness. It may be just fine. But when I'm setting these up, and what's really cool is you can just turn these while they're on the vehicle and set preload. So how I set preload is when I put the car on a flat surface, I want the suspension to sink in just a minor small amount. And so when I set this down, there's just a little bit of droop. Just, very, very minimum droop in the rear. You can see as I set this down, equally in the front and the rear, it has a little bit of droop. And that's kind of how I want it. You don't want it to sink down quite a bit when you set it down, and you don't want it to not settle in to the suspension at all. Move, not even move just any visual amount. So you can see as I set it down, it has a little settle into the suspension. Just a little bit. That's all you need. But the suspension feels pretty good. Definitely easier to activate the suspension or have the shock move. The factory shocks were really kind of numb feeling. This definitely has a lot more feel. That's probably the best term. The numb for the factory stock, plastic red spring shocks. This feels a lot more alive, a lot more reactive.